So, welcome everyone. Sorry for the slight delay. I had a few issues with the lighting. So, it was sort of a sunny day and not really sunny day, so it was kind of messing up my entire green screen here. So, there we go. All right. Now we're pretty much set to go. I'm just checking here if I'm getting any feedback. All right, let me just shut this down. Okay, there we go. That should do it. All right, so apologies for a couple of minutes delay here. So welcome everyone, and today we will be talking about how to deal with a global slowdown. So this will be a little bit different than my usual sessions when I talk about, hold on, let's see. Yeah, that's perfect. And I'm not dropping any frames. Excellent. All right, so everything works. So yeah, so today it'll be a little bit different than my usual sessions when I mostly talk specifically about investing. This will be we'll focus on investing and dealing with debt and those things as well. But I also want to talk a little bit about your people's general emotional and psychological and physical health as well, because I've been getting a lot of emails from my current students and former students as well. Some are very much worried, with all the bad news that we're seeing going around today. So let's look at a few things that are important to keep in mind, right? So as I said, we'll be talking about emotional and psychological well-being. That won't be, I won't spend too much time on this. Then I'll also talk a little bit about physical health, and I get a lot of this stuff that, especially in the physical health section, that one is a lot of kind of very obvious things. Just the problem is when most people are distressed, they're not feeling great, that's more often than not, those are the first few things that they'll be ignoring. So they won't be sleeping right, they won't be eating well, etc., etc., etc. And then again, I'll the largest chunk of today, as usual, I will be focusing on investing, and specifically how to manage when you have a global slowdown, and your income in certain cases for some people might be incredibly uncertain, right? So how do you manage everything? Should you be investing if you're uncertain whether you're going to have a job next month, next year, etc.? Or should you just be saving? What should you be doing? And we'll look at a few items. So I'll just start off with basically emotional and psychological well-being here. So humans are social creatures. Now, it is true that some people are way more social than others in general, and a lot of people that were very perfectly comfortable working from home before this happened are they haven't really seen a significant impact, or maybe any impact, to the way that they're living their lives. And those people are used to just working more or less by themselves in their home office or living room or what have you, programming or consulting long distance and things like that. But for the people that are usually used to conversing and seeing colleagues, maybe chit-chatting with them at a water cooler, and kind of the stereotypical office behavior, if you will, those individuals might have a significant might feel significant tension and stress right now. So it is incredibly important to find ways to socialize. Obviously, Zoom and Teams and all these Google Hangouts and whatnot. A lot of people have been using all those platforms and different software in order to kind of keep track of work and talk to colleagues, etc. But for those individuals that aren't white collar workers that can work remotely from home, they will these days feel even more isolated. So it's important to find ways to socialize with friends. Now, typically, spending time playing video games online, for example, is not the most socially productive way of spending your time. But in many instances, I can tell you this from personal experience, but also from anecdotal experience, but also from actual studies that have been published over the years, that despite that, you might think that, well, two people playing some random first person shooter or playing some other more collaborative game, how is that any form of useful form of socialization, right? Well, if it brings those two people together. And a lot of times, I've personally played various video games when you'll be trying to hunt down some international terrorist or trying to solve a mystic quest or whatever. While you're doing this, sometimes the guys in your party or that are basically on your team, some of them will just literally just randomly talk about how was their day and things that are concerning them during their lives. So in instances where you cannot really go out to a bar and talk to friends, video games, for those of you that are into them or might consider getting into them, might actually be a really psychologically beneficial way of socializing with people, right? First of all, it might help you with your, lowering your frustration, because you can, get to actually blow up things, for example, in some cases. And I'm talking about, online multiplayer type games. But it will also help you kind of share with friends. Obviously, it helps if your friends play similar ones. So it's important to kind of maintain this social aspect, even though normally you would think that it might be a waste of time for a lot of people. But even normally, it does help in some cases for some individuals. And again, seek help if you feel overwhelmed at any point in time. And again, it's not your fault that you might be out of work for a few weeks, months, maybe years in some unfortunate cases. But seek help, either again reaching out to your social network, your friends, colleagues, or loved ones. Or if you're literally all by yourself, there are a number of professional helplines and hotlines that you can contact, depending on if you're a student, if you're, even if you've graduated years and years ago. There are many different very useful websites and people to where you can find information, people to talk to, basically. So don't underestimate how important that is to your well-being. And again, it's incredibly important to focus on things that that are within your control. This is true when you're looking at investing, but this is also true when you're dealing with uncontrollable things. We're bombarded with information, typically bad information or negative information on the various media outlets about this many dead and this many people caught it and this many people are out of job and this these are the job numbers and these companies are laying off even more people, etc., etc., etc. Eventually, we'll start hearing more and more good news, but that might not be for another number of weeks or months in some cases, and it's likely to happen, reemerge. So there's nothing you or I can unfortunately do to snap our fingers like Thanos and make the virus or 50% of the virus go away. That's not going to happen, right? Unfortunately. So focus on the things that you can control. And the really interesting thing is there's quite a bit of data and research being done on this. They've been looking at people in retirement homes, for example, not currently, but over the years, and people that had reduced mobility. And they were basically, they looked at two groups, for example. So in one study, they basically looked at, literally they divided the floor of a old residence or a retirement home into two groups. So half of those individuals literally just got a small potted plant, like a cactus or something like that, a tiny little plant, right? And the other half of that retirement home's floor didn't get anything else. They were just going about their daily lives, right? Again, this is outside of a pandemic setting. This is just under normal circumstances. And then the only guideline that was given to the people that got the plant is, please make sure you water this plant once or twice a week. That's it, right? So you would think, well, how is that any help? How is that any help to me right now? Why should I care about that research? Well, it turns out, surprisingly enough, that those retirees, those people that were in that retirement home that did have that plant, that had this physical control over this small insignificant item, this tiny little potted plant, and they were the ones deciding on which day of the week am I going to water it, how much am I going to water it, how long will I be watering it for. So it gave them some sense of additional control, other than it's 7 a.m. or it's 7:30 a.m. it's time for your this pill and that pill, and it's 10 a.m. and it's time for your snack, and so on and so forth. Those individuals, even under normal circumstances, have a very monotonous life where basically it seems that as though they're only reacting to the things around them. Oh, it's this time now I have to take this pill. It's this time now I have to go. Now it's allowable social time. So you're kind of stuck working in that, and your sense of kind of of lack of control is very, very apparent in those situations. So, and that's just one example for one study. So those individuals had much better outcomes. They reported being a lot happier, and not only that, very surprisingly, their physical well-being also improved significantly. So not only were they feeling better, but a lot of them started reporting that that backache that they used to always get in the afternoon somehow seemed less bad. So all of this sense of control gave people you have kind of these there's basically various neurotransmitters and hormones that get stimulated. I'm not going to go into that too much, but basically you have endorphins that also get stimulated, by the way, whenever you work out. So that's why it's also important to do that. So these individuals were in a much better, or much more likely to do better short, medium, and even long term, by just giving this, having this plant to have control over. So find things around your house, around your apartment, that allow you to exert control over them. Basically do things that basically you're the one that is in charge of how much of something you're doing or how little of something else you're doing. So this definitely it might seem silly initially, but it should definitely improve your well-being in general, if research is anything to tell us. Another excellent way of kind of both improving your long-term prospects, but also helping you out emotionally and psychologically currently, is to try to learn new skills. Maybe you're among those workers whose industry is just waiting for the go-ahead from the government, and you'll pick up right where you started off, right? So maybe you're in that group, which is fine, right? You have a pretty much guaranteed job, hopefully, and you can return to it, whether it's next week or in a month and a half from now. Whatever, you'll still be able to return to it. It's not the end of the world, right? You might be stressed in the meantime, but it's not the end of the world, right? But what if you're one of those individuals that literally has no idea whether their industry will radically change, whether their job that they currently had, maybe you were working for a restaurant or for a small startup, will that startup survive this? Will that restaurant survive this? When will we be allowed to reopen restaurants and things that involve basically a lot of people commingling, right? Things like that. So in the meantime, there are many websites that offer free online courses. You can find pretty much anything you're interested in on YouTube. But if you wanted something a bit more structured, you can go to edX, go to Coursera, Udemy. There's so many freely available, in most cases, courses online, and try to find things that you could learn that let's say you're working in an industry, you're like, I wish I had a bit more knowledge about maybe project management. That way I could maybe I could get promoted or have an easier time managing my employees or managing my coworkers, if that's you. Now, this is the excellent time if you're stuck at home and you can't really do the work that you usually do, whether you're only working part-time or you're not working at all currently. This is an excellent time to actually start learning those new skills and try to think of what else would you like to do, on the off chance that your employer might be one of the later ones to reopen, or might unfortunately not reopen, right? So look at also how can you boost your skills. What are some of the skills you could boost? And I guarantee you there's from anything from basket weaving to playing an instrument to learning how to code, learning kind of more interpersonal skills or team management skills or project management skills. You can pretty much find anything that you want on various platforms, and usually for free. All right, so that will not only improve you as a person and give you additional skills that you can use later on, whether it's in finding a new job or improving your likelihood of getting promoted in your current one, but it will also, again, add more purpose to your life, give you more control over what's happening. So that'll definitely help with that. Now, very quickly about physical health, again, this is I don't have any massive words of wisdom here. It's literally just looking at basic research. People, whenever you're active, again, there's various hormones and neurotransmitters that typically get activated. So some of the more interesting ones here would be endorphins. So if you're, the more sedentary you are, especially if you're used to moving around, running around all the time, the more sedentary you are, basically the lower your metabolism, gets, the more kind of more likely you are to actually maybe not feel great, right? So try to remain active as much as possible. Obviously, those of you that are lucky enough to maybe live in a house instead of in an apartment building, you might be able to, if you have a small yard or something, you might be able to go outside for a few minutes whenever it's not snowing like it was this morning in Montreal. That's another story. But you might actually be able to, go outside for a few minutes and take in a bit of sun and remain active, whether it's just walking around or, jogging around the neighborhood, provided you're able to do that safely. Right. So, or, little things like do push-ups or sit-ups or anything that you can, if you don't have any actual physical gym equipment at home. And again, take in some sun. There's a lot of people that are suffering from seasonal affective disorder. So that's a subtype of depression, which is linked with low levels of sunlight and vitamin D assimilation, basically. So sometimes you could, you could get some supplements. There are various melatonin supplements and things like that you can get to help with that. But basically, right now we're typically at the end of the dark season, so we get more and more sunlight. But with people being cooped up inside homes, it's more likely for people that would normally not be prone to seasonal affective disorder to maybe feel a bit down, feel a little bit blue, even if you haven't lost your job, right? Because there's a lot of uncertainty, right? So try to do these little things. And as I said, it doesn't sound like rocket science, and it might seem very trivial, but it does help, all right? So again, obviously also try to eat healthily as much as your budget currently allows you to, and as much as, again, time permitting. Again, these days most people should have more time to cook, right? If you were the type of person that had 2 or 3 part-time jobs running all over the place, being unemployed in most instances, at the bright side of that is, I guess, at least you have time to actually cook healthily right now. The flip side of that is, based on what your situation is, if you're already struggling with a lot of debt, can you actually afford to go shopping and have a semi-decent, healthy, and balanced meal put together, right? But as much as possible, do try to avoid too much junk food. Again, junk food, comfort food in general, makes you happy very short term while you're eating it. As various comedians have pointed out, no one's unhappy or no one's sad while they're eating, a giant Big Mac or a giant, fill in the blank, whatever junk food you're into. You're very unhappy a few minutes after, and afterwards, especially if you're buying a giant bucket of KFC, for example, and finish half of it or most of it. So while you're eating it, again, also we're coming back down to those endorphins. Things that taste good, unfortunately, many times they're not really healthy for us in excess. So things that have high fat, high sugars, high salt, they might taste really good, but they're really unhealthy long term. So I'm not telling you don't eat any junk food whatsoever. It's just that when you're already kind of in a situation when you have less control or less of a sense of control over things, you might have issues with managing, maybe paying your rent or paying your mortgage and all these other issues. On top of that, adding kind of an unhealthy diet, while you're eating that unhealthy diet, it might make you happy for like a very, very brief period of time. Long term, it's basically, it's more likely to contribute to feelings of sadness and just you're just gonna feel bad about yourself, right? So as much as possible, try to do that. And my last very obvious piece of advice, but again, I'm pointing it out because it works. Try to get enough sleep. Now, different researchers and the different studies, kind of disagree in terms of how much sleep you actually need, but most of them seem to agree that depending on which type of circadian chronotype you are, fancy way of saying, some people need more sleep, other people need less sleep, but overall it would seem that enough sleep is typically between about 6.5 hours to about 8.5 hours. So if you get between 6.5 hours to 8.5 hours of sleep, that should be a good amount per night. Now, obviously, again, There might be reasons why you want to stay awake. Try not to obsessively watch too much news, because again, these days it's nicely super positive and there's not much you can actually do in terms of changing the news. So focus on the things you can control. Get enough sleep. Try to, as much as possible, to remain active and getting in a bit of sun. If it's just opening your window or going on the balcony if you cannot go outside, physically run around outdoors. So again, these are very obvious things, but the reason I'm pointing them out is because they actually work. Okay, so every single one of these things, in terms of learning a new skill, focus on things you can control in your life. Seek help if you feel overwhelmed. Try to find ways to socialize, whether it's on social media or maybe playing a video game with a friend of yours and whatnot, or just calling or Skyping with someone. Individually, they maybe add 0.5% improvement to your daily life. But for every single activity, every single step you're taking to improve your life and cheer yourself up by 0.5% more per day, well, you add enough of these and you'll feel 50% happier than you were the day before. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? All right. So now let's just focus on the main thing here, because obviously those are things that revolve around dealing with income and I just realized that should be a D, not a B there. So that's okay, so this should be a D. Okay, so there we go. All right, so dealing with income versus debt issues, right? How secure is your current level of income? That's one of the main questions. And obviously, if the answer is my income level right now is very secure, I don't have any issues, I'm able to 100% work from home, everything is fine, then chances are the previous two slides, you're like, well, yeah, it doesn't feel great that I cannot go out with friends anymore currently, and I cannot go out to a bar or go see a movie. But, in the grand scheme of things could be worse. Unfortunately, for a lot of other people, things are a lot worse, right? But it is important to keep that in mind. So how secure is your current level of income? Before you're trying to think of anything in terms of investing or anything else, this is very important. And obviously, if your income is very secure, again, the previous two slides are still useful, but they will be less useful to you to implement those things than someone whose income is not secure. How likely are you to be employed in the next 2 to 3 years? This is an important one, and I mentioned this for those of you that attended my last webinar last week. I mentioned this as well then, because again, if you want to look at investing, if you want to look at ways of managing your debt, it's incredibly important to have a short, medium, and also long-term forecast. Short-term, you want to make sure you're able to afford you're not living beyond your means right now, right? You're able to afford your current expenses. Now, obviously, a lot of people that lost their jobs, hopefully only temporarily, are stuck in that position where right now they may not be able to afford all their expenses properly, even with the government subsidies or the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, and even or if you're on unemployment insurance, for example, right? So, as I said, focus on things you can control. There's not much you can do about how quickly we move from this, other than make sure that you keep respecting the guidelines, because the more people respect the guidelines, the faster the economy can reopen, because there will be fewer and fewer cases, obviously. So the reason I'm saying how secure is your job over the next 2 to 3 years is because even though we might get back to work in a certain number of weeks, depending on what industry you're in, virtually every single expert out there agrees that we're likely to have subsequent waves of this. Whether this will go completely away in 18 months to about 2 years or so from now, when we finally manage to get a vaccine and inject everyone. And I know most politicians say 12 to 18 months, and I'm that's kind of the optimistic version. A more realistic one would probably be 18 to 24 months, I would say. So hopefully it'll take only months, but we will see. So chances are, even once you have a vaccine, this thing might reemerge in certain areas, but at least then you can severely limit and reduce the number of cases, so you don't have to shut down the entire economy again. But again, it depends on which areas you live in. If you happen to live in a very densely populated area, and if you happen to work in an industry that is very likely to shut down as soon as you need to, if you're working in retail, right? A lot of stores, and especially if you're working in the hospitality business, so you're working for a hotel, if you're working for for any form of restaurants and things like that that cannot just do fast food. When we have those subsequent waves, yes, a lot less of the economy will be shut down, but those core industries might be more likely to be shut down a bit faster than others, right? So, and keep that in mind. If restaurants do reopen, I mean, so when they reopen, they will reopen. It's just some of them will, because again, in the restaurant business is a very dangerous business as it is. Usually, very few restaurants make it long term. A lot of them kind of try and they survive for a certain number of years and then they eventually go bankrupt. So even when you don't have a pandemic to deal with, so a lot of restaurants that will manage to reopen will reopen at a reduced capacity, because if you have to remain at 2 meters away from everyone else, how many restaurants, before this had their every single table and chair 2 meters away from the adjoining table and chair, and chairs, right? So as a result, in many restaurants, you might have to cut down, half or maybe even 3/4 of the number of people you can actually sit in there, right? So as a result, you need fewer busboys, you need fewer waiters, you need fewer barmaids, you need fewer chefs, etc., etc., etc. So a lot of that will become either in rotating shifts, or people will be unfortunately unemployed for quite a bit longer than just, well, okay, the economy will start reopening in a month from now in certain areas and in certain industries, right? So just think of those things, and how, and be reasonable and be realistic with yourself. How likely are you to have a job within the next 2-3 years? Now, what if you are a student currently who's just finishing their undergrad, or if you're about to finish your graduate degree, and you are either this summer or next summer, that was your time to graduate was this summer or next summer. How likely are you to, have a job if you haven't even started your job, or the job that you might have had lined up is a gigantic question mark whether that will happen or not. So those are important things to keep in mind. And again, this is a perfect time, or as good as any time really, to start looking at other potential skills that you can learn in the meantime if you had a job lined up and that job didn't pan out. And I know the last thing most students want to hear is that, oh my God, I have to do another. Are you telling me I have to do another degree? No, I'm not telling you have to do another degree. It's just depending on what area and what field you are about to graduate in, think of it, always plan for the worst and hope for the best. I'm personally an optimist, and I know a lot of my students, when I hold my webinars, they always ask me, and it's like, well, Alex, you're talking about the economy restarting and stock markets going back up, and the long term the risk is very low if you have a balanced, diversified portfolio. Yet at the same time, you're telling us you need to have 6 months worth of emergency savings right now because the economy is very uncertain. You're telling us that make sure that you do all these things. So you seem to be very pessimistic. So how can you be so pessimistic yet have such a positive outlook on the market? Well, again, no one knows exactly how quickly the market will rebound. What is pretty much a guarantee is that the market will rebound. How can I be so certain that the market will rebound? Well, because it has rebounded on every single other massive and major event that has previously occurred. Whether it was a giant tsunami, whether it was a terrorist attack, whether it was multiple wars over the years, or various recessions and depressions and etc. etc., etc. The market always recovers. How can I be so certain that the market always recovers? Well, again, come back to the basics. What does a stock represent? Whenever you're buying a stock, whenever you're buying an ETF that holds hundreds of stocks, right? What does that represent? Well, whenever you're buying one ETF or one mutual fund, and inside that ETF or inside of that mutual fund, hundreds of different stocks are being held. Think about it this way, right? What does that represent? Every single one of those companies, right, represents humans creating things for other people to use, whether they're services or products, right? So there are certain industries that will always be in demand, right? So as I see here in the chat, so D is asking, are there any industries that are recession-proof or at least more resilient than others? So healthcare or government. Now, obviously, with government largesse that we've seen recently in terms of, governments are basically, showering to various extents different industries or people with tons of stimulus, with either via loans, no interest loans, or via direct payouts, such as the Canada Emergency Response Benefit or the addition to employment insurance and things like that. Obviously, different countries have done different things. So yes, if you're lucky enough to get a government job, I wouldn't say you're 100% guaranteed that you will never lose your job, but currently if the government is trying very hard to prop up the rest of the economy, they're very unlikely to fire their employees. Now, that being said, last week, I don't remember if it was, or it might have been either this Monday or last Friday, one or the or last Thursday, I guess, because it was Good Friday. I don't think they made the announcement. So it was in the last week or so. I believe it was one of the province's premiers. I off the top of my head, I don't remember if it was either the premier of Manitoba or the premier of Saskatchewan. I think it was the Manitoba one, or one or the other. He was saying that basically what they were thinking is, given that there are so many people in the private sector working for various industries that have lost 100% or most of their income, he felt that it was the duty of Canadians working or being lucky enough to have a provincial government position, to start working on reduced shifts. A lot of, and obviously the people that are working full time right now because they're frontline workers, in which, there's different definitions of frontline workers, obviously in healthcare, but also, people making sure that, everything gets let's say the people working on international global trade and things like that, making sure that Canada is still able to ship and receive all ship everything that we're supposed to ship to our trading partners, and also receive everything that we're supposed to receive from our trading partners. So people working in the trucking industry, and people working and also on the government side in terms of all the inspectors and things like that, inspecting trucks and all these things, right? So obviously those people will keep on working full time. There's no point in cutting their hours. But there are many people that, for instance, were working in government offices, being very client focused or front end focused, right? You would have people at Passport Canada working at their Passport Canada offices when you're going in person to renew your passport, for instance. They don't have much to do these days, right? So a lot of them actually work significantly fewer hours than they would normally, yet most of them still pretty much get paid a full salary. So the argument made by, again, either the Manitoba or the Saskatchewan premier is that they will basically ask provincial government employees to start working, those that are non-essential and whose workload is only 10%, 20% of what it normally would be, if not even less than that, to basically only start working 2 to 3 days per week. And then for the remaining 2 to 3 days when they're not working, they would get employment insurance benefits. As a result, that way it actually lowers the amount of overall pay, because employment insurance is only up to a certain maximum, and some government employees have pretty decent salaries, especially if you have 20 years worth of experience. So worst case scenario for a government, that would be one of the steps. So you might see a slight reduction in the amount of money that you're making. But the point that was the premier was making at that point in time was that, okay, we're basically asking government employees to take a roughly 25 to maybe 30% cut to their job, but they're only working about 10 to 20% of they're only delivering 10 to 20% of the work required. So he said, I think that's fair, right? If you personally, whatever job you currently have, right, if you were only doing 10 to 20% of the work you normally do, and your employer says, you know what, we'll cut your income by 25 to 30%. Yes, it's not great to suffer that 25 to 30% temporary income drop. But in terms of how much money you're getting for the amount of work that you're doing, I think that's a fair compromise, right? And for the time that you're no longer getting paid to work, again, you can use that time to learn new skills. There are many free online resources where you can use, again, things that you then, once you're able to reopen, that everything reopens and you're able to work full time, you will be able to adopt those. Now, in terms of what industries are more or less recession proof, well, it depends on what the recession or the government slowdown is due to, right? So if you're looking at these days, what are some of the key industries that will most certainly still operate if we're keeping these sorts of restrictions, or we might have a return of another wave at some point in time, and then you have a more a smaller version of the current lockdown, for example. Well, obviously shipping is very unlikely to shut down anytime soon. So any form of FedEx, UPS, that sort of stuff, like those industries, the delivery industries, those are probably going to do quite well, right? And I guarantee you, even when I should say the economy comes back to more or less 100% normal, which might again take quite a while for that to happen, for people to still be able to hug each other, or actually maybe shake hands. Will people even ever shake hands again? I don't know if the customs will change for this. We will see. I probably think they will, but the point is, those industries, right, are likely to still remain in demand, because again, once people, it takes, I've said this on previous occasions, it takes 5 to 6 weeks to build a habit, to form a habit. So if your habit is, these days we're doing meetings via Zoom or via Google Hangouts or via Skype, right, you're more likely to stick with that. When we return, a lot of employers will probably be very much encouraged by the government, by various healthcare authorities in all countries all around the world, for employees that don't have to be in the office but whose services are needed, to have them work from home. So we might see actually more and more incentives by various government agencies to basically and all across the world, to basically encourage companies to keep employees working from home as much as possible in the industries where it's possible. So that will have quite a few benefits. Right? It should reduce pollution, as we've seen, all around the world. I'm sure you've seen, all of you have seen those reports recently about New Delhi, for example. You find people can finally see, have finally seen the blue skies for the first time in like the last 2 decades or something like that. Now obviously you will, as you're restarting the economy, pollution will start going back up again, but the more people can start working from home, technically speaking, that'll actually be a really good thing, both for the planet and also for themselves, right? If you have a 1 hour plus commute every single day, going to work, coming back from work, right? How long does it take you to get out of bed and just walk into your office, or just walk to your desk in the living room, or wherever you're set up? So you're saving a lot of time, right? So a lot of industries will likely change the way they operate, right? So hopefully you're in one of those industries that at least the silver lining of all this mess is that you're more likely to have a job in the future that normally you would have been stuck, wasting your time in meetings in person in the office, and pretty much doing, not doing much else than that. And if your employer is more likely to be okay with people, well, if today most of the day you're just having meetings over meetings over meetings, and all you have to do is just hand in a report, well, instead of showing up in the office to work the full day today, you know what, just stay at home and come back next week, or do part time, part of the time work from home, and then part of the time maybe go in the office only twice a week or something like that, if at all, right? So those are the ways that some of these it's kind of the positives, I guess, on long term. And again, there are different industries that will benefit or will still be operational and essential in different circumstances, right? Now you also have to look at, so I'll come back to that in on my next slide, but so here, right? Also very important, again, if you're thinking of and because I just mentioned, UPS and FedEx, that doesn't mean you should be buying individual stocks. No, right? The risk is still high. Now is not the time to take very high risk, unless, and this is important, unless you specifically are dealing with, you're in a situation where basically your income hasn't been diminished. You're in an industry that is likely to be considered essential going forward, and you're very unlikely to lose your job or even see a significant reduction in your hours, and your job is more or less guaranteed for the foreseeable future. And also, look how much high interest debt do you have, right? So And when I talk about high interest debts here, I specifically talk about credit cards, so CC credit cards. Okay, so now obviously a lot of people, again, depending on what country you're from, in Canada, most banks have agreed to cut the average 20% interest rate for most credit cards. They've agreed to cut it down to about half, to roughly 10.99%. So let's call it for what it is, 11%, really, right? But the only way to get that is to basically contact your bank and tell them that you would like to you would like to apply for a reduced interest rate. And in most cases, most credit card companies and banks in Canada have agreed to this, right? Again, it's a temporary reduction in interest rates. It's not going to stick around forever, but in the meantime, if you're not able to pay off your debts in full, that's at least something, right? Now, a lot of people have been asking me, I've been getting a lot of emails from students about this, asking me about lines of credit and HELOCs, right? So HELOCs are home equity lines of credit. Those are lines of credit that are backed by some form of residential real estate, typically your principal residence. In some cases, you can also take out a HELOC on investment properties as well. Right. So now these days, both in the US, Canada, and many other countries worldwide, banks have been basically putting higher and higher and more stringent requirements in place in terms of who is allowed to sign up for a line of credit or a home equity line of credit. Because a lot of people think, well, you know what? Okay, 11. Instead of paying 20% on my credit card, yes, it's better that I'm only paying 11, but 11 is still a pretty darn high, interest rate. So a lot of people have been trying to look at, how likely am I to be able to be approved for a line of credit, for instance, right? So if you already had one, your chances are your line of credit is still perfectly usable. Again, depending on which bank you're banking with, depending on how big of a risk you personally represent to your bank in terms of how good of your credit score is, and so on and so forth. We've seen this in previous sessions. I'll have some videos coming up about this in the next couple of weeks. So lines of credit. How does a line of credit work? Well, keep in mind, the vast majority of lines of credit in Canada, at least, the vast majority of lines of credit, and as well as home equity lines of credit, they basically are something called demand loans. Demand loans. What does that mean? Normally, your minimum payment for a standard line of credit is just the interest charges per month, right? So let's say your standard average line of credit is probably these days charges you, depending on a number of factors, but it will charge you anywhere from about 6 to probably about 9%. That will be your standard line of credit these days. Your standard home equity line of credit, again, based on how good your credit score is, how secure your income is, and how well your bank is doing. Your standard HELOC is anywhere from about 3 to probably around 7%. All right. So obviously, home equity lines of credit are the types of lines of credit that have the lowest interest rates. Why? Well, because if you don't pay up, the bank can't repossess your house. So if two people, or if one person owes money to one bank on a standard line of credit and to a different bank on a home equity line of credit, and they only have enough money to pay one of them, which one do you think they're going to prioritize to pay back? The one where if they don't pay, they'll charge them just a standard line of credit, they'll just charge them extra penalty fees, and they might increase their interest charge, or the one that could repossess their house if they don't make their payments in X number of weeks and months, right? So obviously, people will typically go with repaying the home equity line of credit, right? So as a result, these home equity lines of credit represent a much lower risk to the banks, and because of that, they're also the ones that have the lowest interest rates going, right? So so again, the only way to get a HELOC is if you actually own some real estate. Up to about 60% of the value of your real estate can be so of the equity that you have inside of your in your real estate can be taken out in the form of a HELOC. Now, the issue with the vast majority of lines of credit, including HELOCs, being demand loans, is that technically speaking, at its own sole discretion, your bank can choose to transform either the totality or a portion of the line of credit into a loan. Right? And literally, demand loan, they can literally demand repayment of that loan in full or in part pretty much any point in time that they deem necessary. When would they deem it necessary? Under normal standard economic circumstances? Well, they would typically deem it necessary if something along the lines of, let's say you lost your job, but the rest of the economy was doing fine, then you would represent a higher risk to the bank, and then you're more likely for them to maybe say, well, let's say you have a $100,000 line of credit, you're using $5,000 out of the $100,000. They might say, we're going to be reducing your limit from $100,000 to $50,000 because right now you lost your job, you represent a higher risk or something like that. So as long as you haven't maxed out your HELOC or your line of credit, even if your bank were to, let's say, decide that they want to minimize the risk, so they want to cut down on some of the excess potential debt that you could take out. At that point in time, you'll be perfectly fine. The people that won't be fine are the people that maxed it out. Because how would you be fine? Well, let's say you're using, if you're using 5,000 out of 100,000, right? Well, the bank says, okay, no problem. Well, ma'am or sir, we're gonna cut it down from 100,000 to, let's say, 50,000. So it's a 50% cut, right? You're still only using 5,000, so you don't have to repay them anything. What would happen, however, if, let's say, you had taken out $60,000 out of the full 100,000, and then the bank decides they're going to lower your limit to $50,000, right? And by the way, in case you're wondering how come they're allowed to do this, well, whenever you sign up for a line of credit, if your line of credit is like the vast majority of lines of credit, which are set up as a demand loan, you've agreed to this. When you signed up the agreement, basically when you signed the contract, right? When you opened the account, a lot of people might not have necessarily read through all the documentation or paid attention to this particular clause, but virtually every single line of credit out there is a demand loan, and it has this clause built into it. So it is at the bank's discretion to determine when they deem it fit to protect the bank to convert part or your entire line of credit into this, right? So at that point, what would happen in this situation? Well, if right now your max is 50,000, well, the bank will literally say, okay, sure, we're perfectly happy with you still owing us $50,000, no problem. We'll gladly allow you to still, max out the line of credit at that point in time. However, the extra $10,000, we would like that money, please, by end of the month or by next month, basically. Right? So obviously, because this is not just a standard, normal, run-of-the-mill, regular day when you just happen to lose your job or you just happen to, represent a higher risk or whatever, your particular bank needs more liquidity, right? And this is an issue with the whole kind of society and kind of a global issue, really. So they're less likely to put, unreasonable or unrealistic expectations of, pay us back, $100,000 by tomorrow, because no one has $100,000 by tomorrow. You wouldn't have, between 5 and 6 million Canadians that have applied for employment insurance and applied for the $2,000 a month Canada Emergency Response Benefit, right? If that was the case, right? So they're obviously not going to ask for that right away, but they might ask that you repay it over time in a staggered manner. So this is why it's incredibly important. Lines of credit can be really useful if used strategically to lower the amount of interest that you owe, but you have to be very careful about them. If you already have them, try not to max them out just in case, especially in under conditions like we are going through today. So now, a key question here, do you have a ideally 6-month emergency savings account? So do you have emergency savings to last you in case you lose your job or in case that first job you were hoping for takes longer to materialize? So normally I'd say if you have at least 3 months worth of emergency savings and you don't have any high interest debt, you're perfectly fine just investing in the markets. Provided you're doing it via a balanced, diversified, using a balanced and diversified approach. These days, however, I'd probably say, those numbers you should reevaluate them, right? So you should probably have at least 6 months worth of emergency savings, and then you also need a time horizon that is realistic. So 5 years plus, right, is what I keep on saying, and that hasn't changed. Okay. So, and how can I be so certain? Again, I've shown this one before, but for those of you that weren't here, just very, very briefly, this is a graph made or assembled by the Ontario Securities Commission. They're the stock regulator, the stock market regulator in Ontario. So let's just have a quick look here. And they basically collated all this information going all the way back to 1935, so right after the Great Depression. And they're looking at how different types of stocks and bonds and a balanced portfolio, how they've performed over time. And in green here you have a balanced portfolio, so 60% stocks, 40% bonds and other safe assets. And then in red you have the Canadian market, and in this light blue up here you have the US market, and in dark blue you have the international stock market. And then in this kind of yellow, orange, brown, light brown, I guess orange, light brown color, those are government bonds. So those are longer term, so 1 year plus government bonds. And finally, the ones in purple here, those are treasury bills. So those are government bonds that have a maturity of 1 year or less. Okay. And then in gray, you have how much inflation was. So this is, assuming you've invested $1,000 from 1935 until today. And that's literally all you did. You just invested $1,000 once, and then you're just looking at, at how the market has done over time. So obviously, that's a ridiculously long timeline. But the point I'm trying to make is no matter what, here's World War II. See, this is World War II right here. And you see, global stocks, international stocks, did very poorly during World War II, right? So 39 to actually mostly right after World War II. If you're looking at it, actually they did okay during World War II because industries needed to keep on pumping out. The industries kept on having to pump out materials and trucks and things like that to keep the soldiers going. But then, yes, afterwards, you see this big decline once the war is over, right? In 45 would be roughly right around here. So right as the war is ending, international stocks took actually a really big dive. Canadian stocks were pretty okay, actually, in the U.S. as well. And then over time, we had the Korean War, the Vietnam War over here as well. You see it, it's marked down there. And then, various Cold Wars, and every single one of these gray areas, those are small or large recessions, depending on the case. And again, if you're buying individual companies or individual stocks, you're trying to guess which company will outperform the market. That's highly risky. You're less likely to do well using that approach. If you're just going with a standard, balanced, diversified portfolio, it keeps on going up because, again, the world market is not shutting down anytime soon, right? And I know, some of you might have seen in the news, again, everything these days is just COVID-19 here and COVID-19 there. But if you've noticed, there's also quite a few volcanoes that have been active and recently become active again in the last week or week and a half or so around the Pacific Rim. So for some people, some areas, some countries, Krakatoa, for example, in Indonesia, has started spewing lava, I think, since last Friday or thereabouts, like right around Easter. I think it was Easter Friday that it started. In case you missed that, that information, have a look. There's quite a few volcanoes that have been active recently, meaning that for some industries, some areas, some countries, it might be a double whammy in terms of what what's going to happen with their local economies. Around Canada, we usually have spring thaws, spring floods. Hopefully the flood season this year won't be too bad, but those do happen relatively frequently in the spring, right, for many areas around the country. In the summer, we're likely to have more wildfires in Alberta and other places. So all of those things combined makes it very difficult to know exactly which company. As I said, there are certain industries that are a bit more protected. Again, the healthcare industry is probably fairly safe at this point in time because, if anything, people will be just throwing more and more money at the healthcare industry. So there are different ETFs that you can actually buy specifically focusing on healthcare. So that might be an interesting approach, an interesting thing to look at. It's not necessarily right for everybody. Again, balanced. If you have a balanced portfolio, you already are invested in the healthcare industry as well, right? All right. So you're likely, as I was saying before, you're likely to see the economy recover. Long term it'll be fine. Short term, however, we've seen this kind of reemergence, resurgence of the economy. And also, a lot of people ask me, well, should I be buying, things like how about what about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies? Isn't that an investment? I actually have an upcoming webinar talking about that one. An upcoming live stream talking about that one in a couple of weeks. So to get the full, let me just see here. Right. So to get the full list, just simply click on the about page over here, and you can basically see the next 1, 2, 3, 4. The next 5 live streams are posted here. So if you're interested in cryptocurrencies, that one's on May 14th, so in about a month from today. So yes, sure, they go up and down. The problem is there's so much volatility in when it comes to cryptocurrencies that even something like Bitcoin, which is by far the largest cryptocurrency in terms of how much money is invested with it, it's a bit too volatile to be considered an investment. There's nothing wrong if you understand the risks to buy some Bitcoin. However, the risks are much, much, much greater than having a balanced and diversified portfolio, right? So this is, I would say even riskier than most penny stocks, because again, it fluctuates a ridiculous amount. Okay, so this doesn't say you should never ever think about this. It's more of a gamble than an actual investment. If your definition of investment is something that has an easily predictable course or an easily predictable return. Cryptocurrencies are anything but predictable currently. Things might change in the future, but so anyway. So I'm kind of giving away my premise here that I'll be talking about for an hour on May 14th, but it's an important thing to keep in mind. So all of that being said, right? Let's just say I'm going to just look at this one here. So this is a proxy for the S&P 500. It's Canadian dollar hedged, and as a result, whatever happens in the S&P 500, this will reflect it pretty much exactly. So, right. So this is what the S&P 500 looks like. Again, the drop we've had was definitely a lot faster, a lot sharper than what we've experienced in 2008, 2009. Because 2008, the financial crisis started, and we had this little brief recovery, and then it really, really dropped, right? So a lot of experts have been suggesting, or at least, guesstimating, I would say, that this recovery or this bump up that we've seen here in markets, so this is true for the S&P 500. It's also true if I'm going to just add here XIC, that basically tracks the largest 200 or thereabouts stocks in Canada. And let me put that one in I'll put it in red, that way it's very clear which one's which. So in red you have the Canadian market, in blue you have the S&P 500. If I'm taking here, there's NVUN. This one is the US total. There you go. So this is US total market, but this is not Canadian dollar hedged, and as a result, sometimes some of the slight increase might actually be also due to the currency fluctuations. So the whole take home there. So let's put it just from year to date instead of going from max. If you're just looking at year to date, right, everything has kind of dropped to different extents, and it has recovered to different extents from the bottom. But it's not, right? It's not over yet, right? So it's very likely that we will see another kind of resurgence of this, resurgence of bad news, and as a result, you might have a secondary or even tertiary drop over the next few months. So what are the take homes from here? It's basically, it is incredibly difficult to forecast exactly which industries will necessarily outperform others. Again, although healthcare is probably fairly safe, as well as some form of delivery, companies. If off the top of my head, I have to look. Actually, I cannot think of a single ETF that specifically looks at delivery companies. It might exist, but I'll look into it. Again, typically individual companies are a lot riskier than otherwise. So just to drive the point home here, I think it's FDX, right? FedEx, yes, FDX. Right, so keep in mind, FedEx has seen a massive amount of business lately, right? Yet their stock is, not doing much better than the S&P 500. Okay, so just to give you an idea, actually, let me just go back here for a sec. I'll add it as a comparison. So I'm gonna add FedEx, FDX. So that's FedEx here, and I'm going to add it in like orange-ish, right? Because they have that orange color. There you go. So if you're just looking at year to date, right? So it's actually done worse at the bottom, worse than the market average, right? And let's look at the other big player here, right? You're looking at UPS. And let's put UPS in brown, right? That's sort of their color. I guess that's closest to brown as I can have here. Okay. So UPS is doing a bit better than FedEx, but still, right? They're still being impacted. So you might think, well, this is like the world is on its head. So you're telling me that these companies are getting more business than they've ever had before, because now a lot of companies that used to ship keep on shipping with them. A lot of companies that used to not have that much business online, these days the only way that a lot of stores are still able to operate is via their online checkout counter, right? So what's actually going on? Well, this is where that brings me to the sort of the wrap up here, right? So it's incredibly important, before I kind of give you the final takeaway. So very important to be proactive. So whether you're proactively trying to maintain a healthier lifestyle, get a bit more sleep, work out a little bit more, or work out at all. It's very tempting to just be sitting at home watching Netflix all day long if you have nothing else to do. But again, long term, that's not a good thing for your health. Try to focus on things that you can control. If you've had enough of bad news, it's perfectly okay for you not to watch the news media 24/7. Honestly, it's probably a good thing for you to not to stop doing that. Stock markets may recover faster than the job market, and conversely, sometimes the job market. So this is sort of this weird dichotomy with the example of UPS and FedEx. Despite the fact that they're probably having their best quarters right now that they've had in years in terms of how many deliveries they're getting, because the broader market is not doing well, and a lot of times investors might be thinking, well, okay, sure, they're getting business right now, but what happens in 5 years time, 10 years time, or not even years, but let's say five months from now, or 6 months from now, 8 months from now, if the economy doesn't recover fast enough, maybe some companies go out of business, and then FedEx won't or UPS won't do so well anymore, because now there's fewer businesses using their services, because those businesses might eventually shut down, right? So in many ways, the stock market tries to kind of look forward, and it's just anyone's best guess of what's going on. So sometimes you'll have instances where a company is hiring hand over fist because they need more and more drivers. They need people to work for them. So like FedEx and UPS, they've been hiring recently. Yet the stock is still battered. The stock is still 20% down compared to where it used to be, even though it recovered by about 20% from the absolute bottom, right? That's one. Other times, the reverse happens. The stock market, stocks for certain companies in certain industries might actually do really, really well, but those specific companies might actually only be rehiring a handful of their employees. They might only rehire 50% of their employees, or only 75%, or only 20% of their employees. So why is this disconnect? Well, the disconnect happens because of this. What's good for the company is sometimes not what's best for the employee, and vice versa, right? So sometimes companies are looking for employees. That's a good thing for the employee, because it's like you're more likely to number one, be employed, and number two, potentially even get a bit of a boost, right? We've heard in Canada various industries, various workers, in grocery stores on the front lines, various healthcare workers in retirement homes, for example. They've been getting various bonuses either from their own industry, either from their own company, or in the industry association, or the government. It just says we're going to be boosting these people's salaries by $3, $4, X number of percentage points, right? So when you have high demand, it's normal now, not only that your job at that point is secure if you happen to work in those industries, but you're also more likely to actually be able to get a raise when many other employers are cutting down. Yet, despite that, the stock of your company might actually still be low because investors think that, the economy is still going to take a while to recover, and because of that, the stock price is not where it used to be. Right? Now, arguably, stock prices were probably quite a bit inflated anyway before this, so we needed a correction, we needed a pullback. Did it have to be this gigantic or this big? Probably not. But, a pullback once in a while is actually a good thing for stocks. That way they don't go ahead of themselves too much. All right? So that's the thing. And then the reverse, as I said, happens is also when basically if a company is able to still be profitable with less staff, overall what it means for the company itself is that they're able to make a higher profit. They're able to return more money to their investors and their shareholders because now there's fewer locations to service. There's fewer people to pay health insurance for. There's fewer people to pay, to match their RSP contributions for employers that do that, or even pay salaries for, right? So what's good for the company, what's good for a stock, it's not necessarily what's good for individuals. So in many instances, there is and there will continue to be a divergence between how well the company is doing financially and how well their stock is doing, and how well those employees are being remunerated, and how well they're being paid, and how likely they are to have a steady, safe job. So again, the market will most certainly recover. How can I be so certain? Because again, the market represents thousands upon thousands of companies, which themselves employ tens of thousands, hundreds, and sometimes even hundreds of thousands of individuals. So saying that the market will not recover is basically admitting, or basically saying that there's no way that we'll ever invent something new. There's no way that humanity will ever build something new, or be able to increase the production and devise new ways of proceeding or doing. So yes, some industries will be hampered by this for years to come, others for months to come, either in full or in part. But others will thrive, and there will be new industries growing. And some of those new industries that will be hot industries might be somewhat apparent, and others are completely not apparent right now. So this is why a balanced, diversified approach probably works for the vast majority of people. So my main take home, or my last take home, I'd say, is basically don't worry too much about what exactly happens in the markets on a day-to-day basis. If you're in a place where basically you have sufficient money in your income is relatively stable, relatively safe, and you have sufficient money to pay off your high interest debts, and you no longer have any high interest debts, and you have at least ideally 6 months plus of emergency savings, and you don't need the money for at least 5 years plus, then look at basically buying a little bit of all of those balanced, diversified the balanced, diversified portfolio, which I talked about in various previous live streams, and I'll talk about in future live streams. And again, I'll have individual standalone 10 to 15 minute long videos coming up within the next couple of weeks as some of my sessions at various universities I give webinars wrap up as the semester ends, and I'll have a bit more free time to do the YouTube thing. So I'll be providing you with a lot more information about that. Now, that being said, again, for some people, right now is the worst time to invest. The main question you should ask is not, should I be investing now because I stand to make a lot of money? You might stand to make a lot of money if you're able to be invested for long term. If your employment is very uncertain and unsteady, I would say, this is the wrong time for you to invest. Yes, sure, you could make a ton of money, but at the same time, if the economy, goes through a second wave or third wave, and it's likely going to happen, how bad they will be, no one knows, right? I'm not sure to what extent the market will respond. It might drop even further than it dropped a few weeks ago over here, right? It might drop significantly more than it did. So I don't know. No one knows for certain. People can just guess, and they're educated guesses mostly, but you don't know, right? So markets could easily drop past this point, or they could continue just recovering. I don't know. So because you don't know, you want to make sure you have that steady income. And if you don't have that steady income, it's much more important right now to focus on the things you can control. I have no control over the stock market. I wish I had control over the stock market. That way I could tell you what to do. Right? I have no control over the stock market. I tell you long term, it'll be fine. History has shown us that, and just the logic makes sense, right? If you're buying the entire market, Canadian, US, international, have some bonds there just to be safe, some REITs, preferred shares, things like that, right? But I don't know what's going to happen in the market short term. No one knows, right? So because you don't know, if you're uncertain about your job prospects, focus on the things you can control. What can you control? You can be proactive and try to find new jobs, try to find new ways of earning money, but eventually, on the off chance that your job that you're hoping that would come back will not come back, or only come back part-time, and that part-time is not enough to live on, in the way you wanted to live in, or in the area you're currently living. So focus on things you can control. Try to learn new skills. I guess that's the good news about trying to make the best out of a bad situation. You have those of you that lost their jobs. At least you have a lot of free time for the next few weeks going forward. So it's as good a time as any to try to do that. And then again, make sure you keep in touch with people, socialize. It's important for your own mental sanity, and to just not feel down all the time, because it's very easy to feel down if all you're doing is you're staying in your basement, or you're in your home with the blinds closed. Right now it's a beautiful sunny day outside in Montreal. Right now I'm just looking out. So try to take in a bit of raise, and it might sound like a silly little thing, but every little thing helps. And if something 5% here, or 0.5% here, 0.5% there, you can improve your mood by 10 to 15, 20%, 30% in a day by all those little things that you do. Give you a better sense of self, and a better sense of you're able to get through this. Things will align much more easily, much more steadily going forward. So if you have any questions, you can just leave them because I already answered the one that was in the chat. If there's anything else in the chat, you can just type it up now. There's about a 20 to 30 second delay between me saying something and you actually getting the feed via YouTube. There's a lot of people live streaming these days, so that's just a YouTube kind of benchmark. So I'm just gonna wait maybe another minute or so. Okay, yeah, I'm not seeing anything. If you're in the process of typing something, because I have a meeting coming up in a few minutes. But basically, if you're in the process of typing something, and if I'm basically quitting the live stream before you manage to type it in, just make sure I retype it in the comment section, and I'll answer to you a bit later today when I have or maybe tonight when I have a bit of time. Oh wait, one question that came in here, somewhat unrelated, but what do you think the impact on immigration will be based on for both job-based and investment-based? Great question. So basically, it depends on which immigrants you're looking at, right? So if specifically you're looking at foreign workers, right? There's a very specific plan that the federal and various provincial governments are putting in place, because right now in Canada, right, we're getting a lot of foreign workers, typically from South America, from Mexico in some cases as well, but also from India in some cases. So we're getting a lot of these foreign workers that typically come here to do the slightly lower paid jobs that normally Canadians would you can find something paying you higher. So as a result, not that many people are interested in Canada and working on a farm planting things. But for foreign exchange workers, for example, that pay, despite the fact that that's less than what a Canadian would be willing to work for the amount of work done, it's still 5, 6, 10 times in some cases what they would be able to earn doing the same or a similar job in their home country. So it's kind of a win-win. So for those individuals, Canada has already put in place, the various provinces as well as the federal government has been putting in place very specific guidelines in terms of basically a 14-day quarantine that is mandatory. The farm or farmer that hires these foreign workers has to pay for a 14-day hotel stay for each one of those workers. So they cannot just be left in a shed and at the end of in some corner of the farm. They actually have to be placed in isolation in individual hotel rooms, the employer, so basically the farm or farmer that hires them, has to pay for that. They also have to be provided with food and regular wages. So they would the same wages that they would normally earn for working a full day's work, they would be getting at that point in time. And then after the 14 days are up, it's still the farms or farmers' responsibility to make sure that they provide the workers very specific instruction in terms of maintaining the social distancing norms and so on and so forth. And also the workers, I believe they're being provided with PPE in their home country, so like with gloves and a mask that they have to wear. So first of all, they get screened in terms of the temperatures being taken. I don't think they've implemented actual COVID-19 the actual test, because there's not enough tests to give it to everybody. But basically, people are being checked for their symptoms are being checked before they get on the plane. If they exhibit any symptoms, they're not allowed to get on the plane. If they have fever, they're not allowed to get on the plane. Once they're on the plane, they have to keep again the gloves and the mask on for the entire flight until they get to their quarantine hotel room in Canada. Then they stay there for 2 weeks, and then once they're fine, that they'll be kept again at a distance, and then they're supposed to limit interaction with anyone outside the farm and things like that. So from that point of view, those individuals, that part of the temporary worker immigration aspect, that will go ahead more or less as planned, with again obviously significant extra costs and fees on the part of the farms and farmers that hired them, right? How will that impact international immigration? That's honestly anyone's guess. I don't think anyone has really looked at that yet in terms of how many refugees will Canada be taking in this year versus last year, or any other country really. So that's something that even people that I know in the federal government, it's not something they're currently actively looking at. Currently, they're still in the process of, let's look at what are best practices worldwide. What is Italy right now doing as they're slowly but surely reopening their country? How are things progressing in South Korea and Singapore and Taiwan, where they started reopening the economy? That's what everyone's focus is on. Probably in another couple of weeks from now, they'll start looking at, okay, so what are we going to do with reopening international travel? What are we going to do with immigration processes? Keep in mind, right now, a lot of non-essential, non-crucial, non-urgent surgeries have been put on hold for weeks and months, right? So not that immigration is not a priority, it's just that they're trying, right now the government is still scrambling to address the more critical issues. But that's a great question. I don't know the answer. Again, the few connections and contacts that I have within the Canadian government, actively working on policy right now, I've been talking to some of them over the last few days about a number of things. And funny enough, immigration came in, but it was more with the aspect of with foreign exchange workers and temporary workers, but yeah, in terms of immigration, I didn't hear them having a plan yet, or even a draft yet. So that's pretty much where that stands. So thanks again to everyone for attending today's webinar. I have to run because I have a meeting in a few minutes. So I'll see you next Thursday for the next live stream. So if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments section below. Bookmark this if you want to, if you just came in late and you want to watch this, bookmark it, because I don't leave the live streams. They remain unlisted. I don't leave them public typically on the channel itself. So thanks again for your time, and have a good one, everyone. Have a good day.